Hari Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Jyotirmayananda Society, a journey to self-realization. Please subscribe for the mystical meanings of the scriptures and to enjoy daily satsang with us. We are currently exploring the book Yoga of Perfection, summary of Srimad Bhagavad Gita, commentaries by Swami Jyotirmayananda ji, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. We are currently exploring the summary of chapter 1, and yesterday we had discussed the battlefield scene where the various armies of Kauravas and Pandavas had come together. And the mystical meaning is what we had started covering yesterday, and we'll continue that. Dhritarashtra represents the lower mind which is blind to higher reason and is the progenitor of evil forces in the form of Kauravas. Duryodhana represents the impure ego, Karna represents impure intellect, Ashwathama represents the impure chitta or the subconscious. Dronacharya represents the forces of ego, and Bhishma represents the power of the intellect or willpower force. Drona and Bhishma are adored by both Pandavas and Kauravas, but the role of will force and the power of ego force must come to an end in the process of liberation. Individual will and energy must submit themselves to the emergent vision of intuition. They must die in order that the deeper vision may unfold. The clinging of the soul to previous forms is harmful in its onward march. Sanjay represents the voice of conscience. It receives messages from the higher self and it conveys it to the lower self. Yudhishthira represents dharma or virtue, Bhima represents artha or material attainment, Nakula and Sahadeva represent kama or fulfillment of human desires. The brothers are the embodiments of purusharths or self effort. Lord Krishna himself is moksha or liberation, the final end of purusharthas or self effort. The army of Kauravas is symbolic of the dark forces such as hatred, fear, malice, anger, greed, violence, infatuation, etc. And the army of the Pandavas represents various forms of virtues such as fearlessness, purity, truthfulness, compassion, humility, etc. Arjuna asks Lord Krishna to drive the chariot in the midst of the two armies. Lord Krishna brings the chariot in the middle of the two armies. Arjuna sees Bhishma, Drona, and others who are his loved ones, close relatives, assemble to fight. His memory of previous attachments is awakened in his heart. He is filled with affection, pity, and love. The consequence of this battle appeared sinister to his mind. The worldly glories appeared insipid. His reason was clouded. He enumerated the disadvantages and the terrible consequences that would ensue out of this battle. He said that destruction in family would lead to the destruction of family rights. This will result in impiety. Consequently, the woman will become corrupt. There would arise confusion of castes. Thus, the slayer of the family will go to hellish worlds, having deprived their forefathers of the offerings. He would rather be killed by his enemy unresisting than he would kill them. Such was his clouded mind at the time. All kinds of logics he used. Thus saying, Arjuna, casting away his bow and arrows, sat down on the seat of the chariot, his mind immersed in grief. Thus ends the first discourse entitled Arjuna Vishad Yoga, the despondency of Arjuna. Moving on to chapter 2, the summary Sankhya, it's also known as Samkhya Yoga, the yoga of integral knowledge. To the despondent Arjuna, Lord Krishna, with his face lit up with smile, his hands drawing the reins of the horses, his eyes filled with compassion, said, O Arjuna, Whence have you developed this cowardly spirit, most unworthy of a hero in this perilous condition? Renounce this impotence, the weakness of your heart. At this, Arjuna threw himself at the feet of the Lord, describing his mental state, his desire not to fight. Lord Krishna then commenced his immortal teachings, knowing that it was the most appropriate time for Arjuna to listen to the truths of deeper life, the yoga of knowledge. O Arjuna, you are grieving for things that should not be grieved for, yet you talk of wisdom. There is no death, no destruction for the soul. The body undergoes various changes, but the self remains the same. Even after the death of the body, the self does not die. Knowing the self to be immortal and the bodies of all beings to be mortal and transitory, you should not grieve for transient things, but on the other hand, you should train your intellect to endure the pair of opposites, such as heat and cold, and contacts of sense objects. Though the self is immortal and eternal, it is not experienced as such until one attains that steady intellect which is not affected by gains and losses, pleasures and pain, and all pairs of opposites. That which is subject to death must die. That which is imperishable cannot be destroyed. Therefore, there is no cause for grief. The self puts on several personalities in the course of its world process. But such changes in the personalities are even like casting off old clothes for new ones. There is no essential change in the self. The self is indivisible, imperishable, unmanifest, proof against weapons, earth, water, and all elements. There is no grief when a person realizes the self. The subject of self is very subtle. It is a wonder to find a teacher who teaches the knowledge of self. It is a wonder to find an aspirant who has turned away from the sense pleasures of the world for realizing the self. The self, verily, is the wonder of all wonders. Keeping the vision focused on the eternal self, you must perform your duty here in this world. Such actions will not bind. When the vision is set on the perishable clouds, it is in turmoil. When it is set on the infinite sky, it is free from turmoils and agitations. Therefore, fight in this battlefield without thinking of success or failure. This knowledge of self liberates one from all troubles. Even the slightest movement towards this knowledge saves one from a great fear. There are two paths, the path of pleasure and the path of liberation. Those who follow the path of pleasure perform various sacrifices that are described in the Vedas for the attainment of various desires. The good actions which are performed without negating the egoistic vision, without acquiring knowledge, lead one to heaven. But when the astral experiences are over, one is brought down again to the mortal world by the force of the remaining karmas. The other path is the path of blessedness, the path that leads to liberation. If you rise above gain and loss, pleasure and pain, if you give up attachment and expectation of fruit with reference to the action you perform, you will attain the blessed goal of liberation. This is known as Buddhi Yoga or Yoga of Knowledge. It is far apart from mere performance of religious rites or good actions, because by following this path of wisdom, one casts aside virtue and vice. One becomes liberated from the fetters of matter. But be performance of karma, Vedic rite alone, by doing those, one is ever caught in the wheels of birth and death, because they are not enough to liberate somebody. One should perform one's actions infused with the knowledge of the self. Without that knowledge, we will continue the cycle of birth and death. But if we do it with infused with the knowledge, renouncing fruits of action in order to attain immortality, that is the key. When the intellect is freed from all worldly influences and its perplexities, it is intuitive, it is filled with truth. A person who possesses such a steady intellect is a liberated sage. Then, at the request of Arjuna, Lord Krishna gives the description of a liberated sage or one who is of steady wisdom. So, we will continue this satsang tomorrow morning. Hari Om Tat Sat.